Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to Quill Healthcare's 10 Best Payer Contracting Practices webinar. This is the seventh monthly webinar sponsored by Quill Healthcare, specifically for the purpose of enabling practices like yours to gain beneficial knowledge based on the expertise provided from a wide array of industry experts and consultants. Today's topic, 10 Best Payer Contracting Practices, is all about enabling you to negotiate and analyze with the result being more profitable payer contracts for your practices. Before we begin, I'd like to reflect for one moment on the reason that we are here. And no, I don't mean anything esoteric by that, but rather the reason that we are in this event is that Quill Healthcare wants to bring value to practices through its expertise, in addition to providing a terrific assortment of medical and office supplies meeting the needs of your practice, no matter what practice you're in, as well as high-quality products along with excellent customer service. And this particular event is all about enabling more efficiency and effectiveness in the operations of your practice. A couple of administrative matters which will make this event more enjoyable for all participants. We do have a large number of participants today, and my desire is to make this an interactive event where we pause with some frequency to field questions from you, the audience. And also, if you're more comfortable participating through an electronic vehicle, I encourage you at any time to send an email to info@healthsense.com. I'm pointing to that right here. And we will immediately pick up your question. And during pauses, my colleagues, Ms. Regina Vasquez and Ms. Susan Charkin, will participate and field those questions. And speaking of Susan and Regina, they are going to be joining us throughout the session for questions and answers. Susan is my partner and the founder of HealthSense Inc. and a Quill executive consultant, and Regina Vasquez is a Quill executive consultant as well as VP of Accounts at HealthSense Inc. And literally amongst us, we've negotiated about 15,000 plus payer contracts of all different sizes, types, and varieties. So we'll be sharing our knowledge and dialoguing with you throughout the event to give you maximum value today. At any point, in addition to asking questions through our electronic mechanism, during pauses, and I will indicate when those pauses are in the session, simply press *6 on your phone line, and that will free up your phone so that you can go ahead and interact with the presenters. And when you're done speaking, if you would please once again press *6. When you're done conversing, then we will be in a position where we minimize any background noise and that sort of thing. So you can ask questions on your phone line simply by pressing *6 during questions and answers, or beginning right now, please send any emails that you would like with questions to info@healthsense.com, and we will immediately pick those up and address your questions during the question and answer session. Also, at any point in time, if for any reason you lose connection with this session, all you need to do is in your browser type join.me/healthsense, and your session will be restored. So you can immediately get back to exactly where we are at any point in time in the session if you lose contact. So simply go to join.me/healthsense and dial back in to the phone line, and you'll be good to go. The other point is up front, I will tell you that within 24 hours after this session or later, you may go to healthsense.com/copies, and there will be not only a PDF copy of this entire session, but a complete recording of this session as well. We need 24 hours to basically bake the recording and get it ready for you. And at that point, you'll be able to get access to the recording as well as a PDF version of the materials presented today. Now, a few quick background points. I have noticed about 2/3 of you are attending a Quill Healthcare webinar for the first time, and I welcome you to this first event, and I believe that you will get a lot of valuable information over the next hour and a half. And I wanted to give you a little bit of background about myself and my colleagues. I'm Steve Selbst, and I'm a Quill Healthcare consultant and have spent the last 14 or 15 years now negotiating and analyzing payer contracts of all types and doing a variety of general healthcare consultancy. In a prior life, I also spent a career with the IBM Corporation and managed fairly complex software development and business development projects. And along with me, I mentioned that I have my partner and the founder of HealthSense Inc., Susan Charkin. She brings a rich career background of payer contracting experience with several Blues organizations, HealthNet. She was the manager of outpatient surgery up at UCSF, a trustee in a large hospital system, and brings a variety of both provider-based experience and payer experience all together for you in one package. And then my other colleague here, Ms. Regina Vasquez, is an expert on payer contracting and has been in this business doing payer contracting since approximately the year 2002. And she has, I can't say she's seen it all because none of us have seen it all, but she's certainly seen quite a few different variants of payer contracts and contract types, and she'll be bringing to bear that knowledge for you today as well. So we're delighted together to have this opportunity to share this information, and as I say, to make this an enriched experience for you. We look forward to your questions throughout this session, and we're more than glad to veer off of the itinerary a little bit to address those questions, and at the same time we'll make sure that you do get the full benefit of the information. Okay, first point is, as a level set, what I have found over the years is that in the revenue cycle of practice management, practices tend to spend a fair amount of effort doing basic practice management, front desk management, billing and collections, scheduling, cash flow, etc. Also doing quality reporting and some clinical data gathering. All of those things tend to get focused, but what I find is there's a good number of practices that really don't spend a considerable amount of time analyzing and negotiating payer contracts. And to really get the full leverage out of the revenue cycle and therefore maximize the revenue and profitability of your practices, you want to be able, hand in glove, to marry your practice management processes with your payer contracting processes. And what we're going to do is put some science behind payer contracting today so that you can follow a prescribed process, and it is a repeatable process that you can use successfully in analyzing and negotiating your payer contracts. So it's going to be a very full itinerary. We are going to go through and evaluate managed care fee proposals and show you how to go about dissecting those proposals. We're going to talk about SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and how you go about leveraging those strengths and minimizing the threats. We're going to talk about how to go about doing reimbursement analysis, including in-network versus out-of-network analysis, and present to you a model that you can use for objectively assessing the revenue value on certain agreements, about whether or not you might be better off in or out of network. We're also going to talk about chargemaster hygiene. That is making sure that your bill charges are set to UCR thresholds and make sure that you don't end up getting paid the bill charge rate below a contracted rate by virtue of setting your bill charges too low. So we'll show you how to go and protect against that possible outcome. We're going to talk about the actual techniques for negotiating win-win agreements, and we're going to talk about the often forgotten step in payer contracting, which is the actual monitoring of the payer contract to ensure that your claims are in fact paid correctly, that is, paid to the level of your contracted rates, and that you're not getting underpaid. Often, practices, if they do negotiate a contract, will put the contract in place and just process claims against the contract after it's in place, but never really go back and monitor the payments to ensure that the payments are getting paid correctly, and that can be result in literally tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars of lost revenue, depending upon the size of your practice. And then we're going to talk about language, and that is contract language. What are some of the gotchas and the things to look for in a payer contract relative to claims processing dates, the lesser of, language, and other operational constructs excuse me, that you'll find in contracts that affect the operation of the contract and the processing of claims. And then, especially for this session, I've personally done some very recent research across a broad array of industry forums, documents, events, etc., and have put together a special section here that I'd like to go through with you specifically to thank you for coming to this event and for leveraging the expertise that Quill Healthcare brings to the table. And I'm going to take you through some trends and directions that are very current and I think will help you in this environment to navigate this sometimes difficult and hard to understand maze of payer contracting. One of the, of course, emerging structures that we'll talk about are ACOs, and talk a little bit about, again, what they are and whether or not it makes sense to participate in an ACO. So we have a lot to talk about over the next hour and 15 to 20 minutes or so. Now, one of the things that we do is we elicit participation from the get-go. It is anonymous, so don't worry. If you participate, we're not going to in any way reveal names or anything like that. We're just trying to gather results and kind of share with the audience real time. So we don't keep track of who is responding, but it would be most helpful if you would participate. And to participate, all you need to do after we cover this question is simply go to www.healthsense.com/Q1. Just open up another browser tab, go to www.healthsense.com/Q1, and you'll be presented with the choices A and B above, and we'll discuss the question, and then you'll have an opportunity to answer it. So here is the question, and this is might seem like perhaps on the surface a fairly rudimentary question, but it's an important one because I think it really sets the stage for the way to think about payer contracts and the value of a payer contract. So let's get right to it. If we have two codes, in this case 58140 and 99213, and let me try my pointer skills here, see if that works out. But basically two codes here. 58140, 99213. We have 58140 at 80% of Medicare. We have 99213 being reimbursed at 90% of local Medicare rates. Let's assume for simplicity it's including any patient co-payments, co-insurance, and so forth. And what we have is that the 99213 is priced at $60 and is performed 1,000 times. Whereas 58140 is essentially priced at $1,000 a service and is performed 100 times. Now, the question here is if you can get a 20% increase, but you have to pick one of these codes only, which code would you choose? Would it be the office visit code 99213 or the service code 58140? With that in mind, what I'd like you to do now, please, is go to www.healthsense.com/Q1 and answer that question. And what I'll do is show you as well how to go about answering the question, and then we'll take a look at the results. So here is the question. Again, pick either code 99213 or 58140, whichever one you would like to get your increase on, and let's tally up the results. I'll give you one moment, and we'll take a look at the results. Again, healthsense.com/Q1. No responses. Give it one more moment. It's unusual. Usually, even with a smaller participation, we do get a response. Anybody that would like to try, healthsense.com/Q1. I'll give it one more shot, and if not, get you to the answer. Okay. We have a little bit of a here we go. Sorry about that. It looks like I just had to back out. That makes more sense. Like, what is going on here? Okay, here we go. A little bit of a user error here. Just had to reset it. Okay, so looks like we had about 15 responses in favor of getting an increase on 99213, and we had 8 responses on 58140. And the answer is, drum roll, 99213. So now the question is, why? Okay. So the reason is that it's all about revenue. It's a little tricky because we threw in other variables here, which, at some level could seem like they're important. That is the percent of Medicare that the rate is based upon. But at the end of the day, when you distill percentages of Medicare, they translate to some amount of reimbursement rate per code, and that in turn results in a calculation of the revenue, which is a function of the rate times the volume. So really the two variables that come into play here, because we provide them, are the rate of $100 times 1,000 in the case of code 58140, the volume being 1,000, and in the case of 99213, the rate being $60 performed 1,000 times. So you have 100K of revenue, basically for you have 100K revenue for 58140, and you have 60K of revenue for 99213. So 100 is better than 60. So I'll take the 58140 based on the calculation. So actually, the answer turns out to be in favor of 58140, based on the fact that it generates the most revenue, and that's fundamentally what you're looking at there. So when you look at payer contracting, it boils down to 10 best practices, and we're going to focus on 3 primary areas of those 10 best practices: preparing, negotiating, and monitoring. So it's a little bit easier sometimes to break it out into stages. And as I say, don't forget to monitor, because it's often the place where the most money can be lost after a contract is put in place. The stages then further break into data analysis, proposal letter preparation, negotiations and iterating negotiations, escalation, considering out-of-network options, and then monitoring and, if necessary, renegotiating, with the goal early on of getting to contract negotiations completion. What we're going to do is go through each of the 10 steps, beginning with data analysis and then moving into proposal letter preparation, and then go into how to build that proposal letter, how to iterate the negotiation with the payer, and how to get the closure. So with that, we fill in a little meat on the bones. The first practice that we're going to look at is how to figure out what our top codes are and which ones are driving revenue, how to benchmark against Medicare and get to the top 20% of our codes that produce 80% of our revenue, how to get to SWOT analysis in payer fee schedules, looking for the soft spots in the fee schedule so you can negotiate, assess your out-of-network options and your charge master calibration, look at a SWOT analysis for your practice, get together a highly impactful proposal letter, and continue to negotiate by following up and making sure that you have the payer on the hook to get your response, evaluate proposals and optimize them, and then review the contract language to make sure that there aren't any operational language constructs that are going to get in the way of your reimbursement, in particular things like the lesser bill charge and claims payment terms, and then monitoring to make sure you're paid correctly. Before I begin with the details on evaluating a specific payer proposal and how to break it apart, I think this will be a good time to pause for any questions and discussion up to this point. So I'm going to go ahead and press *6, open up the phone lines, and remind everybody that you can ask your question as soon as I do so, simply by pressing *6 on your phone, and then when you're done, press *6 again, or you may send an email, if you haven't done so already, to info@healthsense.com. So I will unmute the lines at this point. Okay, so if you'd like to ask a question, press *6 now. Okay, so what I will do is, here, I see one that popped up about G codes. I think somebody had a question along those lines, but if you have a question about G codes or any other codes, go ahead and press *6 and ask it. It's a little hard to pick them up on the fly in a chat at this point. So anybody that wants to ask a question, go ahead. In the meantime, I'll ask Regina and...
So Steve, I can help out with this. The question from viewer 53 is, our office uses G codes, not CPT codes. Do you have any of those codes? And I guess the further question would be, would Revolution software be able to benchmark G codes? And
okay.
then Beth also, following that, said they use L codes, and there was another person, viewer 102, who said they use L, A, and S codes.
Oh, okay.
So letter codes seems to be an issue here.
Okay. Well, yeah, the first thing that I'll mention is we're going to show you some techniques for analyzing codes, whether they're numeric code or letter codes, whether they're lab codes, whether they're DME codes, all of the above. The tooling that we use for illustration purposes is a web service called Revolution Software, but actually I'm going to go through it in enough detail that you can repeat these processes for any code if you'd like as well. It might take a little bit longer, but you can essentially perform the same analysis on any code in a spreadsheet. So the answer is these concepts are applicable to both 5-digit numeric CPT codes as well as lettered codes. Any other questions at this point, Regina?
Not right now.
Okay. All right, then let's kind of get into the meat of analysis. So the first thing is that what you want to do is,
I'd like to know about dental codes. We use D codes. Are those going to be available on this webinar?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So D code, same idea. We're just for illustration purposes showing you how to analyze codes. That just happen to be based on a practice that primarily had a urology practice that primarily had numeric codes, but the concepts that we're using, in fact, would fit D codes, G codes, A codes, etc. Basically, any kind of medication, any kind of lab code, DME code, etc. will all follow the same sort of process. Okay. Okay, so with that as a backdrop, the first thing that you want to do is based on the kind of practice you're in, and again, it doesn't matter whether you're a primary care practice, a orthopedic practice, that matter, chiropractic practice, you name it. Basically, what you want to do is figure out the services that drive 80% or more of your revenue, and those are the codes you really want to analyze, because typically in a practice, especially a specialty practice, somewhat in a primary care, but more in specialties, you'll find that there can be several hundred codes to analyze, and it gets a bit unwieldy, and there's really no reason to hone in on 200 codes that are producing 5% of your revenue when you have, say, 20 codes that produce 95% of your revenue. So the key here is to get to the 20-80 rule, get to the 20% of the codes that are producing the 80% of the revenue. That's point one. Point two is, once you gather up those codes, you want to put it into a format like this one, where you have the codes, you have the site of service, since for Medicare benchmarking, you need to have that site of service, office, or facility. You want to calibrate your volume over a year's period, get the bill charge. The practice charge then is derived by the volume times the bill charge. Get the Medicare payment. If you use a tool like this, it can be done automatically, or if you're using other codes or another scenario, you can look that up off the CMS site. And then the contracted rate, which comes out of your payer contract or associated payer contract fee schedule. Then the percent of Medicare, which is a function of the payer rate divided by the Medicare rate, and then the revenue, which is as mentioned, a very critical calculation, because ultimately revenue is going to rule your most important codes, and that's derived by taking the volume times the payer rate. And then what you do is you put all this information together, and we have in blue here some benchmarking data that is gathered in this tooling, but even in the absence of the benchmarking data, if you have a collection of your own payer contracts, you can compare them to one another. But the key here is to sort this kind of a data gathering in a spreadsheet or in a web service tool like this by doing a descending revenue sort, so that your codes that are producing the preponderance of your revenue come to the top. And again, you keep the focus on the 20% of the codes that are driving the 80% of the revenue. Then, once you have your data structured in this manner, you can start to begin to look for patterns in that data, which will lead you to what you need to ask for in a payer agreement. And one of the things that is really important is payers arm themselves with people that do a lot of actuarial analysis to come up with fee schedules and to calibrate what they're able to offer and not offer. So in order to be effective, you need to have a similar business process on the front end. And we're spending a lot of time here discussing data analysis, because it actually is proven that if you spend 50 or 60% of your time doing this data analysis up front, you're going to enhance your chances greatly of success. And for that matter, you're going to know whether or not your negotiation is going to lead to more revenue because you've done your homework up front and you understand which portions of your agreement you can move in order to derive additional revenue value. So in this case, if you look at the descend revenue sort, you can see that code 99213 comes to the top. You can also see that as a percent of Medicare, it's pretty low. Even in the absence of this benchmark data to the right, which is giving you regional Medicare benchmarks as a percent of Medicare and state and national. The point being that, you can tell pretty much off the bat, 66% of Medicare for an E&M code is not very high. Then you can also see that you have other codes that are at the top here, like 59400, that are driving a lot of revenue. So they're important just by virtue of their position in your fee schedule, regardless of whether or not they are under reimbursed or reimbursed at, say, a reasonable level. And then we have a collection of service codes here, laparoscopies and other, that are basically well below benchmark. So you can see that one's at 60% versus benchmarks at 96% of Medicare, 112, and a little bit below benchmark, but still a very important revenue producing code. Then you go further down the list and you can start to see that some of those, 59514, some of the other E&M codes. So you got the 5000 series and the E&M codes continue to kind of you detect a pattern where they're under reimbursed at a lower percent of Medicare than benchmarks, in this case, that are available from other providers. But if you don't have that data and you're doing spreadsheet analysis, and just compare them to the other agreements that you have in place and circle those codes where you have that under reimbursement condition, and then you can start to develop a business proposal off of that. And I'll show you, by way of example, how we dealt with this exact scenario. But I also want to point out that there's other calculations that you want to do here. For example, there's an average percent of Medicare, and then there's a weighted average percent of Medicare. Why do we care? Okay, that's a very, very basic question, an important question. We do care, and the reason we care is that averages, by virtue of the way that averages are calculated, they count every value once. You add them up, right? You divide by the number of instances that you have, and that's your average. Well, that doesn't take into account essentially the revenue importance of the code. So how do you then take into account, based on your practice, what the revenue importance of a code is? Well, what you need to do is you need to take the volume and multiply it by the payer rate for each of your top codes, sum it all up, make that your numerator, and take the volume and multiply it by the Medicare rate for each code, sum up all of the values, make that the denominator, and thus you have your weighted average calculation, which is now representative of what you're really getting. And I have seen so many cases, folks, where you go into a payer contract negotiation and the payer, tells you, look, you're, like in this case, you're getting 108% of Medicare, and that's in line with what other providers of your type are getting. What's the problem? Well, the problem really is you're not getting 108% of Medicare. If you analyze it, you've determined that you're getting 92%. And this is where analysis is so critical, because if you didn't do this workflow analysis to weight the importance of each code based on its revenue and do that calculation, you would be under the illusion that you're at a higher level of reimbursement than you actually are. And it's not that it's not that it's incorrect or falsified that you're getting 108% of Medicare. It's a question of how you choose to calculate it. What I suggest to you is you ought to calculate your weighted averages and base your increases off of weighted averages and not off averages. So that's a really critical point here in weighted average versus average. And you will see these kinds of 20-point-ish disparities often when you do this calculation. Often not in your favor, because somebody has thought out these fee schedules pretty carefully when they comprised them and considered the volume impact ahead of time. So it's important that you do the same before you go about asking for an increase. So based on the codes that we flagged, what do we want to do? Well, as an example, what we may want to do, since we saw an under reimbursement condition on E&M codes, is drive them up 40%. We might want to take some of these service codes that we saw that were either high revenue producers like 59400 or some of the others further down the list, and basically drive them up by 25%, do a 10% across the board on other top codes, and let's kind of see if a payer were to, if we were to go back with a counter proposal along those lines, what might that do relative to our outcome? So what I've done here is produce the same fee schedule, and again, you can do this in a spreadsheet or a web service, whatever. Forget for a second whether you use a spreadsheet or a web service to do this. At the end of the day, what you want to do is map out your codes and get the revenue associated with the current offer that's on the table. And what you want to do then is map your proposal, which is reflected in the blue boxes, the comparison rates. And if you make all those changes that you saw on the previous page, upping your E&M by 40% and so on, then what you end up with is driving another $88K of revenue up for $408K, and that's that's kind of what that's what you're going to often be dealing with in these negotiations. I mean, there are rare cases where a payer may just do an across-the-board increase, and you don't have to get down to this level of detail necessarily, but that I'd say is often the exception, and particularly if you want to hone in on certain services and some practices, radiation oncology treatments and so forth, where you're really trying to drive carve-outs, you do need to get down to this level of analysis, model the effect of this is our current reimbursement, this is what we're asking for, and you can see, going back to 99213, for example, the rate was 50, we upped it by 40% to 70, and the result was the additional revenue effect of 30K. We did that for every single one, and when we added up all the marbles, that's how we got to the 89K. And that's what you need to do, is really detect the patterns in your reimbursement, focus on the top 20% of the codes that are driving 80% of the revenue, and get to that increase that you're looking for. Now, along with that piece of the analysis, there's also the SWOT analysis from a revenue perspective of answering a basic question, which is, are you better off in or out of network on a particular payer agreement? And I've had a lot of practices that just get upset that the payer is undercutting a reimbursement proposal that they don't like, and they sometimes react to it and say, look, I just can't accept this proposal, I'm going to go out of network, or if I don't get a certain amount of money, I'm going to go out of network, and they don't really provide a basis upon which they even know whether or not they should be doing that. I mean, what if they're making that decision just based on the fact that the rates are seemingly low, but if they were to go out of network, their patient attrition would be so high, for example, that their revenue would actually go down. So what we're trying to do here is give you a method of modeling how you might go about determining whether or not you're actually better off in or out of network. And you can, again, construct this in a spreadsheet. For convenience here, I'm obviously using a web service for illustration. But the way you would go about doing it, see, is you take the first row here, this 99213. So you perform the service 1,500 times. Again, let's assume over the course of a year, you have a bill charge of $115.50, and you have a discount against your bill charge of 20%. And what you can do is basically model your out-of-network revenue, and the simple math of it is you take the 1,500, multiply it by the 115.50, take 1 minus the bill charge discount rate, which is 80%, right, to cut it down based on the discount variable. Since you're collecting less money, you're collecting 80%, not 100%. So 1,500 times 115.50 times 0.8. Let's assume your office staff is going to spend more time collecting from individual patients than they would on an in-network agreement. And let's assume it taxes them about 10%. So let's tax our revenue, since we're doing a revenue-based analysis, by 10%. So 1 minus 100% minus 90% is 10%, or 0.9 is going to be the variable that we use here, 1 minus the 0.1. And then we'll multiply again by 1 minus 0.3 for the percent of business that we think we're going to lose by going out of network, since we have to account for that lost revenue for patients that might attrit. So we add up all those marbles, and this tooling has done that calculation, but the way it comes out, and I just gave you the calculations, you could reconstruct in a spreadsheet, but that's the way it's going to come out, is it's going to tell you that out of network you'd make $87.3K, whereas your in-network, which is really simple to calculate, is 50 times 1,500 or 75K. And you see, you do this for each of your top codes, and what you come up with here is that you're actually 145, 146K worse in this case in-network than you would be out-of-network. So this would be a case to say that if the payer fee schedule scenarios is structured in this manner, the way it's laid out here, you would actually be better off considering going out of network, assuming your contract allows you to do that. So you can then interpolate these numbers, and you can raise your discounts, you can lower your discount off bill charges, you can basically raise your patient attrit, raise lower discounts, whatever. You can play with all these variables and see at which point you're at break even or better. And that's really what you want to do here. So now when you are presented with a payer fee schedule, you're doing this thoughtful analysis to determine in some economic way, objective manner, whether or not you're better off in or out of network versus just saying, I'm ticked off and I don't like my offer, I'm going out of network. And that's the purpose here. Now, you may still do that, and there's certainly going to be a subset of practices that still do that, but I encourage you to do it with objective information at your fingertips, because, folks, when it comes to payer contract negotiations, knowledge is, in fact, power. Okay. Now, bill charge modeler. I want to talk to you about this because a lot of practices lose revenue because they simply set their bill charges too low. And how does that happen? Well, simplistically, the way that it happens is that virtually almost, I can't say every payer contract because I haven't seen every single one, but I would say every single one that I've seen has a clause somewhere in it that deals with the lesser bill charge or the contracted rate. And I really want to repeat this twice at least to get this point across, because if you just go back and remember what I'm about to say, you can probably take this one tip and increase revenue in your practice, unless you have been doing this with a business process already. And what I'm about to say is the clause that you will see in the payer contract will either be exactly like this or a variant of the payer will pay you the lesser of your bill charge or your contracted rate. Again, the lesser of your bill charge or your contracted rate. So what does this mean? It means if my bill charge is, say, $90, my contracted rate is $100, even though I negotiate a $100 contracted rate, I'm only going to get paid $90. So I've now left $10 per office visit on the table. So let me just explain how this model, flags those occurrences and how you can build this model. And then I'm going to pause for another set of questions, because I imagine by now some of this is, starting to ring true in some agreements that you're dealing with, and I think it'd be a great opportunity to share information, answer questions, that sort of thing. But before I do that, let me at least convey what you're looking for here. What you're looking at is you have a bill charge. Let's just take a specific code, say 59400. It has a $2,500 bill charge, and we have decided that the UCR threshold in our area is at 250% of Medicare. So if I calibrate this bill charge at 250% of Medicare, which is what I'm saying I desire my bill charge to be, it would really be $5,256 and change versus the $2,500. Therefore, the difference between the actual bill charge and the recommended bill charge is over $2,700. So now what we can do is, again, by taking these factors up here, like the out-of-network discount, we can take the $2,756 difference, multiplied by 0.8, which is 1 minus the 0.2, and then multiply it by 1.2, which is just taking the 5% of my book of business that's out of network multiplied by the 24 units, and voila, come up with this 2,646 of possible upside revenue by virtue of collecting more money, which I have intended to collect because I set my bill charges too low. So that's point one, is I'm out of network business. There's an increased revenue opportunity by virtue of doing better charge master calibration at 250% of Medicare. But the other thing is that if I take the bill charge less the payer allowable, the issue is that the bill charge basically is $256 less than the contractor rate. You see that? Just to make sure that one's pointed out. So here's the bill charge, right? And here's the payer contracted rate. And you see that's an issue. This is, remember, the payer will pay lesser the bill charge of the contracted rate. So that's telling you that you've got a red flag here, because you're only going to get paid $2,500 for that service, even though you negotiated a better contracted rate. So now when you go back and audit your EOBs and you start seeing this sort of a discrepancy, you're going to be like, wait a second, why am I getting underpaid? Well, we have met the enemy, and the enemy is in the mirror because we set our bill charge too low, and we need to fix that ASAP. So the first thing you'd want to do is make sure that your billing system is adjusted immediately, because payers do that kind of comparison. Okay, so with that, let me go ahead and open up the lines one more time, and we'll have some dialogue about this. Okay, let's do that. Okay, asterisk 6. Who steps up first?
Hi, Steve. This is Susan. We have a practice from Carol, who said we're a relatively small practice. Is it realistic to think that the big payers would be willing to negotiate with us? We have trouble even getting their attention.
Oh, okay. Great question. I'll give you some thoughts on that, Carol, and thank you for asking it. And I'd like my colleagues to embellish some of these thoughts. My thoughts on it are, the honest answer is it depends. And what does it depend on? One of the things it may depend on is your location, for example. Are you in a rural area or an urban area? Are there others that perform the same services that you perform that are within a 20 or 25 mile radius of where you are? Do you have any unique services that you perform as compared to other similar practices in the area? Can you demonstrate, particularly in this world, which we'll get to, a value-based metric that shows a set of outcomes that reduce, for example, hospital readmissions, that would demonstrate that the payer, should reward you accordingly. So these are, just some examples of what would determine that answer. Susan and Regina, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, this is Susan. As Steve mentioned to begin with, my background is actually I was director of a number of payers, including a couple of Blues plans, Health Net, and Aetna. In order for a payer to be licensed, they have to demonstrate that they have a certain amount of coverage, be it hospitals, physicians, whoever. And if they don't have enough network coverage, they would be in danger of losing their license, which in the over 20 years I've been doing this, I've never seen happen. But that really dictates to a payer, who they need in network. So I always say, number one, just because, the only reason why somebody's telling you no is you haven't gotten to the person that's telling you yes. That's number one. Number two, the way that you can really get their attention is even if you're a small practice, if, for example, you're the only entity that's offering a particular service. For example, we had a pediatric ENT that was the only pediatric ENT in their state, and they were doing very, very, very specialized services out of the university hospital. So even though they were only a two-man practice, we were able to get them a significantly higher increase just by virtue of that. So just because you're small doesn't necessarily mean that they're not going to give you a payer. It all depends upon the big question is, do they need you in their network? Who else are they going to use if you are not in the particular payer's network? Because if you're not in that network and they need you, then they're going to be forced to pay 100% of billed charges, and the patients wouldn't have to pay co-payments. Now, again, that's state by state, and there's a lot of kind of gray areas, but that's just generally the rule. Steve, does that help answer the question?
Sure. And Regina, did you have any additional thoughts on that topic?
Yeah. The only other thing that might dictate whether a payer is willing to contract for a full contract is what your specialty is. If their policies, the plans that they're writing, don't have good coverage or don't have coverage for what you're providing, then that may be another reason that they would shy away from doing a contract. It's the vast majority of plans. And I've also recently heard from several large payer organizations that because a majority of their clients are self-insured employer groups, and the rules are a little bit different for self-insured plans than they are for commercial plans, that they can limit their networks due to the employer group's preference. So that was another kind of new paradigm that's out there right now.
Okay, thanks, Regina. And also, there was a question that I saw. It's hard sometimes to pick up these chat questions, so encourage the folks to send info@healthsense.com the emails, rather than chat them, because we don't always see the chats. But anyway, I did pick up that there was a question about weighted averages, and again, reinforcing that formula. Let me explain the formula again, because it's something you can build into a spreadsheet, and also let you know that if you go to healthsense.com/blog after the webinar is over, we actually have a lot of different articles and payer contracting advice out there, but one of the articles is just written to literally step you through the weighted average calculation. And I'd highly recommend, if you're building that algorithm, take a look at that particular blog post about weighted averages. You can just search the blog for weighted averages and it'll pop up. But anyway, the way you do it is you take the payer rate. So in this case, let's take the 59400 to 2756.25. You multiply it by 24 units, and you do that for each and every code, and you add them all up. And you make that the sum of those values becomes the numerator, which is really the sum of the revenue based on the contracted rates. And then you take the units and you multiply correspondingly by the Medicare rate, all right? And you do that again for each and every row. You sum them up, and that becomes your denominator. And you divide the two, and that's how you get to your weighted average. And really, seeing the forest through the trees, why do you go through that? Well, the reason you go through it is you're now essentially weighting each code based on the revenue importance, and the revenue is really a function of the units times the contracted rate. So you can't just say, look, I'm getting 119% of Medicare for this code, 192 for that code. Let me add them all up and divide by 20 or whatever the number is, because then you're back to, well, what if the code that I'm getting, 180% of Medicare on is only worth $1,000, and I'm getting 80% of Medicare, for $2 million worth of my revenue. Well, we do averages, you're not going to see even something that obvious. So you don't want to work with averages. You want to work with weighted averages. Again, really critical point. I'm glad that audience member asked that question. While the lines are open, do we have any other questions at this time, or anything came in?
There actually are a couple. 30% a national average of amount of patients that leave when you go out of network.
Oh,
Otherwise,
that's a great...
how would you estimate that? Yeah, otherwise, how would you estimate it?
Okay, yeah, thank you. Terrific question again. So the 30% that is being asked about referred to the 30% here about the percentage of business that is lost going out of network. And it's a great question because, how do you know exactly what the attrit rate is for a given practice? And the answer is it varies greatly based on the circumstances of each practice. I don't know of a single uniform answer to this. We tend to use, and I'll tell you different variants of it, we tend to use 30% as a default parameter in the absence of, let's say, any better insider knowledge by either the medical directors, physicians, or office managers and administrators. We just defaulted to that, but often there is better knowledge. I'll give you an example. If you had a specialty practice that was the only one in Marin County, California, which for those unfamiliar, Marin, let's say Sausalito, it's the town just over the Golden Gate Bridge on the other side of San Francisco. Well, if you were the only specialty practice in that location, then, and you also have a demographic of relatively prosperous patients and so forth in that exact scenario, and the alternative for them is to drive over the Golden Gate Bridge, and it's like a whole other world there to get to San Francisco. Well, you're in a situation where because of the demographic of your particular patients, it may be that with reasonable discounts off bill charges, instead of the attrit rate being 30%, it might be close to zero. All right. Now, conversely, if you're a primary care practice, let's say in the middle of Los Angeles, and we have a lot of participants today, we might have somebody like that. The scenario, or any large city, you have a lot of competition around you. So if you were to go out of network, here's a case where the payer might have other options in terms of licensure, like Susan spoke about. And in that scenario, perhaps the percentage is much higher. Maybe it's, instead of being close to zero like it was in Marin County, maybe we'd lose 80 or 90% of our patients. So we run a much greater risk. And that's the reason why we like to model it as best we can. This is a case where you need to apply the collective knowledge and instincts even of the administrators and the physicians based on your knowledge of your particular patients, because indeed that percentage may be much higher or may be much lower than the 30%. So it's a terrific, insightful question, and I hope that helps you to calibrate that, as it's a very, very critical variable in that model.
I have one more chat question. MetLife Dental Plan is one of our lowest payers, and I'm having issues trying to renegotiate with them. I have been told they do not negotiate contracts, and there is no provider relations department to discuss this with. Have you heard of such a thing?
Okay, and actually, Regina, you and Susan actually probably have more specific experience recently with MetLife Dental than I do. Why don't you two provide your insights on that one?
Okay, I can say, this is Regina, I can say in general, dental plans, most dental plans that I've encountered do have these kind of set fee schedules, and they pay a certain amount to practitioners in certain locations. They will generally only go outside of those specific or set fee schedules if they have some type of specialty practice that, again, are the only one in the area that does that, and they need it in their network. They need to have it covered. And I will say, too, that bleeds over into some physician practices, too. Some medical payers also have similar policies where they have set regional fee schedules. But again, I think the important thing, as Steve was explaining earlier, is to understand where you might bring them value and put some, and he'll get into this a little bit more, put some pressure or leverage, use your unique value to apply leverage in the negotiation. Susan?
Yeah, what I say is we can't really talk about individual negotiations for payers. What we can talk about is just general strategies as far as working with this particular payer. Again, we can't really address exactly how to deal with that individual payer per se, but what Regina's really talking about is just kind of general strategies to deal when this happens with any kind of a payer in this particular situation. But I just, as people are giving questions, if they can just, not mention a specific payer, just give us the general question, just mention payer A.
Yeah, and the reason for the sensitivity on that topic, folks, is the other clause that you'll see in most payer contracts is that once you sign them, you're agreeing to confidentiality related to that specific agreement. So, that's the reason why we're trying to generalize it a little. But, we can talk generally about dental plans versus specialty practice plans and so forth, or general practitioner plans, etc. Okay, any other questions at this point? Okay. So, let me just get us back into presentation real quick. One more time. Here we go. Okay, so again, keeping on pace here, we've gone through kind of a quick assessment of the importance of analytics, and we spent a lot of time on it, over 50% of this session, because that's the weight that it should have when it comes to your negotiations. Remember we talked about preparing, negotiating, and monitoring. That preparation stage, which is really what we've addressed, is where you should be spending 50 to 60% of your effort so that you get it right when it ultimately results in an effective negotiation in your favor. Now, mergers and acquisitions, I put this question in here, and I would like you to, take a quick shot at this one. And basically, the idea is you have two practices here that are merging. Okay, one's making $1 million, paid at 100% of Medicare before they merge. The other's making $200K, and they were at 120%, so they had a much greater percent of Medicare overall. Than the larger practice, and the practice C, which is the merge practice of A and B, basically would like to remain in payer one's network, so they want to stay in network here. However, they want to make sure that in the absence of any other fluctuations, basically, that if they were to accept an arrangement where the final offer for the combined practice is 108% of Medicare as compared to 100 for the practice A, and as compared to 120 for practice B, so B going down 10% or 12% of Medicare, 10%, and B is going down, but A is going up a bit, 8%. Are they better off? And that's really the question. So in this scenario, they get 108% of Medicare. The one that's making $1 million, practice A, is at 100%. Practice B, making $200K, is at 120%, is going to go down to 108%. Are they better off as a combined group? Yes or no? Please go to healthsense.com/Q2 and let's tally the results. This time, I should be able to go get them the first time. Okay. Again, just go to your browser, healthsense.com/Q2. Okay, see 5 responses. A little more, guys, a little more. Okay. Getting a little tired of voting. Okay, here we go. Let's see how the 5 answer. Oh, we got to 9 in that short time. Excellent. Okay, looks like we had about 67% yes, and 33+% no. Okay, so let's go back and take a look at this scenario. Okay, so the answer is yes. And why is the answer yes? Because the goal for practice C is to make more money. And I know that sounds like, well, yeah, of course. Well, the point being that if you're practice B and you're coming into this scenario, if you don't share in this upside, and the upside, mathematically, right, is you're looking at $1 million going up 8%, so you're going to get an 80K boost here, but practice B, which in effect goes down 10%, 12% of Medicare, 10%, go down 20, 80 minus 20 is 60, so the overall practice C is best served, so that's why the answer is yes, because their revenue increased. But the issue is, and you get into the incentive structures, how was the merger put in place, do the individual practices now truly operate in unison as a combined practice as a part of practice C, or are they going to, in effect, have their reimbursement cut back because only only the physicians that were part of practice A are going to benefit? So, that's where this gets complicated, is more in the structure of the merger and the sharing of the incentives. But if you assume that the calibration of this combined practice is such that revenue is shared proportionately with the merged practices, then clearly as an entity, as a new tax ID, practice C is $60K better off than they were prior to accepting this offer. So the answer absolutely is yes, but be careful of all the incentives and the sharing and the structure of that merger, is that's where these things can sometimes fall apart. And that was the reason for the question. Now, SWOT, and we've had an opportunity to talk a little bit about this qualitatively as well, but what you want to look at from a SWOT perspective, and I thought the question about a smaller practice and how do you differentiate really led to this kind of a structural model. But what you want to do is think about your positioning before you write that proposal letter to a payer, and you want to think about your location, your size and market presence, your referral network, practice patterns, quality initiatives, your unique services, employer group relationships that you may have, practice collaborations, and value-based, because when I say value-based, we can be talking about maybe you've already implemented an e-prescribe system, maybe you've implemented a scenario where you're prescribing generics 90% of the time, you don't do any out-of-network referrals to ASCs and to laboratories. That's going to weigh very favorably as well from a payer metric point of view, so that's all good. So you want to look at those strengths and opportunities. You also want to be cognizant of your weaknesses. We talked about, are you competing in a metropolitan area with other practices? What's the payer's reimbursement policy? Do they have the standard fee schedules, and this is going to be an exception, or do you have to pick from one of 5 different fee schedules? Mergers. Are you now competing against a smaller number of larger practices? Are there large payer-initiated ACOs? What is the out-of-network reimbursement policy of the payers? You want to kind of consider all of those factors, position your strengths and opportunities in the best possible light when it comes to putting together a proposal letter, and that really takes us to best practice 5. Now, up to this point, we spent all this time. It's 10 after 1. We've been at this for like an hour and 10 minutes, and we're just now writing a proposal letter. And that's in real time what I would expect that as an effective practice negotiating payer contracts, that this is what you would be doing too. You would be doing your analytics and dissecting it. You would then be doing your SWOT analysis, and then, and only then, would you sit down to write your proposal letter to the payer, because now you know what you want to ask for. So structurally, how do you construct a proposal letter, and how long should it be? Structurally, you want to get to the point fast, and we'll show you an example. You want to establish that relationship. why am I writing to you? Don't beat around the bush and write an inductive letter which tells them all the great things your practice does, and then at the end says, oh, by the way, I'm looking for an increase, because before the payer ever gets to the end of the letter, they're never going to get there. They're just going to stop reading and put it, in some stack of paper, never to be found again. So you want to tell them right away what the purpose is to writing and what the reasons are that you're writing to them for this increase. And then you want to essentially close the sale, throw the hook, and make sure that you put them on a timetable. We expect a response within, by May 1st, no later than May 1st, and we'll be following up to make sure you've received our proposal in the meantime and to answer any questions. Everything needs to be the payer needs to be on the hook. On the hook means that there's some expected next action, and you want to evoke some kind of a response. Even if it's not a favorable response, I would assert that some response is better than no response, because there are many strategies that you can invoke even if you get a negative response. If the ball game is not being played and you don't get any response, then you're not really in a negotiation. So the goal is to get the most favorable response that you can, but the next rule is of negotiation with payers is any response is better than no response. Okay, so here's an example of how we might start off. So I'm contacting on behalf of practice named X. So here's the value. They epitomize an office-based paradigm of treatment, performing services at half the cost of competing practices, and they're the largest provider of services in the area. So now we've talked about the fact they're doing office-based procedures, probably saves money versus ASC facility fees, and certainly compared to the overhead of a hospital. They do reduce costs compared to competitive practices, so they've obviously been tracking their costs, and they happen to also be the largest provider. But I'd say even if they were a small provider in this case, they might have enough on this table to make this an interesting negotiation. And then they lend some credibility to how long they've been in business, and they talk about how many covered lives that they have and how much money they're making from the payer. So there's quite a bit of information in these few sentences here, and that's really what you want to get to. You don't want to write a novel here. You want to get to the point and reinforce it. And then you want a little bit more about what the practice is doing specifically that reinforces the points in the first paragraph: network coverage, clinical efficiencies, special procedures, and list them out. If you can give some examples, and talk about the effect of the savings if you happen to know what that is. In some cases, it can be 3 to 6x what might be happening in a hospital due to the overhead. And then you want to make sure to close this thing. You've reviewed it, and et cetera, and the bottom line is that based on your current fee schedule, you're committed to remaining in the network. And you notice I worded that positively. I didn't say if I don't get an increase, we're going to be moving out of network. That can be, that can often evoke a radical response on the front end, and you are trying to negotiate this to success. So a nicer way of saying that, if you are considering out of network, is talk about, assuming this is true, that your goal is to remain in the network, but you need to do so at rates that work for you. So always try to keep these things positive. Always keep an eye out for what's in it for the payer to give you an increase. In this case, it was office-based procedures. It could be value-based. Start thinking like a payer. Think about the things that they care about, which is, of course, saving money when it comes to these kinds of agreements. If you can help them do that, probably worth throwing a few extra bucks at you to do that. So we get to practices 6, 7, and 8. We've delivered this letter. Now we need to follow up. If you just deliver the letter and forget about it, you're probably never going to hear back. So you need to have your office administrator, whoever's negotiating your contract, certainly within the first week of when you send that letter out to the payer, saying, getting to the right person that it was sent to, and you want to send it to the contracts management department, not to provider relations. If you send it to provider relations, it will probably never turn into a negotiation, or if it does, you're going to delay it by a month or two until you eventually get it to the right person in the contracts management organization. So make sure it's in the right place. Make sure you're following up that they have actually received it. and get that response one way or the other by that date that you have specified in the proposal letters. That's the idea of the iteration here with best practice 6 and 7. If you need to, you can, if you've done your out-of-network assessment and you've determined you are better off out-of-network than in-network, you can always do that escalation. And then finally, once you have that agreement in place, you need to monitor those claims. Like we saw before, you don't want to get in a situation where the bill charge is set too low, or for whatever reason the payer is not paying you at the level of your contracted rate. So this whole encapsulated process should be followed, and like any effective business process, you're going to be less effective if you skip steps. So think about these 10 steps. Think about these 10 steps breaking down to 3 simple phases: the preparation, the negotiation, and then the monitoring. Now, a few more points, and I want to make sure we get these in here. And I'm going to do this a little bit quickly because I want to hit some trends and directions, which I think you'll greatly benefit from, that are really apropos to the times that we operate in within the managed care environment today. But when you look at your contracts, and this is a laundry list of the operational language to look for. I'm not an attorney. I told you I'm an executive healthcare consultant, so I understand the business side of this quite well. It's always important on any contract, of course, to have your legal counsel assess it from a legal perspective. However, what I can give you here are some very practical items, and you can, print this and keep a copy of it next to you when you're looking at a payer contract. But these are the things you want to look for. Permanent termination. Ideally, you want it 90 days without cause. So if there's some kind of change to a fee schedule or something unfavorable that occurs relative to that contract, if you have the flexibility to get out within 90 days, you're in good shape. Now, a lot of them are written to be based on the anniversary date and essentially evergreen, which means that if you don't take action, say within 90 days of the anniversary date of the agreement, then it automatically renews. And that's not uncommon, but just make sure that you give yourself as much flexibility here as possible. Now, there are some advantages too, where you can get longer term locks on agreements and get some benefit in cost of living increases and make them 3-year agreements and things like that. That's a whole other realm, but here let's just say, try to maintain as much flexibility as possible, 90 days without cause. If you're using non-par providers for ancillary services, whether it's anesthesia services, lab services, ASCs, etc., and the payer doesn't allow for that, that is going to get painful as you get into this agreement. So, make sure you confront that on the front end if you have selected non-par providers that are very important operationally to your practice. And there is a trend, of course, within payers to standardize these kinds of services. So you have, your LabCorps, your Quests, and so forth that are often required. It's part of being in the payer's network that use their services for those ancillary capabilities. Timely claims payments. If you're dealing with multiple procedures, make sure that language is addressed. Dealing with implants as an ASC, you want to make sure that your implants are carved out and covered, and that you get your cost plus shipping cost plus 10% ideally. Maybe you won't get that 10%, but at least get the implant covered and get the shipping costs covered. Retrospective reviews. If you basically are in a situation where you do that audit and you find out that there is either an underpayment to you or you were overpaid and have to pay back, you want some reasonable limits of time so that this doesn't come back and bite you. And I've seen some practices in multi-million-dollar disputes with payers because the retrospective period literally extended for years, and they suddenly were hit with, from behind with a major collection issue from the payer who said, gee, we've been overpaying you, and they haven't been doing their claims audits the way I prescribed, and all of a sudden they owed, millions of dollars of practice revenue, which even for a large practice was a big deal. Favored nation, all I'll say there is you don't want favored nation. This means that if another payer has better rates, that you're going to guarantee that you'll lower your rates with this payer to meet the other payers. You know, I don't see that so much anymore, but if you ever see anything like that, get rid of it, because each of these agreements needs to stand on its own. And then we'll talk about performance-based metrics and some of these other items. Now, monitoring claims, all I want to say here is best practice 10, often the most forgotten part of the process, is that you don't go back, you put the contract in place, you know, you get rates that you can either live with or that you're happy with. Hopefully it's the latter. But now what happens is the EOBs start flowing, the patients start flowing against the agreement, and yet when you do an audit, you find out that you're being underpaid relative to the contracted rates. And again, you can build a spreadsheet. This was a module taken out of this same web service. It does the same kind of thing, but basically what it is you're taking the volume times the payer rate, and you're multiplying the volume times the actual payment rate, and you're taking the delta of the two to determine whether or not you're underpaid overall and on certain specific codes. And when you start seeing this underpayment condition, you want to do this. Good hygiene dictates that you do this on a monthly basis and don't wait, because if you wait, again, you may pass that retrospective period and be out of luck. Now, a couple words about ACOs and some trends and directions. ACOs, of course, have their birth as part of the Affordable Care Act. Generally with an ACO, an accountable care organization, these are integrated organizations that not necessarily they don't always operate as a single tax ID, but they operate structurally as an integrated care organization. You have the primary care physician as the so-called quarterback in the ACO scenario, and the ACO basically then has a set of metrics associated with it, typically care metrics and performance metrics, and then those pools of money can get paid out depending on the structure of the ACO. The PCP typically can only participate in a single ACO, whereas specialists have the opportunity to participate in many ACOs, which means then that there are decisions to be made, just as there are with payer contracts about which ACOs to participate in. The model, sometimes you might not even realize today that you're dealing with an ACO. It might be your familiar IPA, or even an integrated multi-specialty practice may be operating as an ACO. You will have a hospital system as part of the structure, and we show three, common models. And then, of course, the integrated hospital system, which has group practices integrated with the hospital system, is a fairly common one as well. So ACOs, while they don't always flash in front of you that they're operating as an ACO, it's pretty common now that large IPAs, Monarch, Banner, all over the country you see IPAs now having merged into the structure, hospital systems, etc. You want to, like you do with direct commercial agreements, you want to evaluate your options. And what I would tell you to get more information about these agreements and also to understand capitated versus fee-for-service models in an ACO structure, take a look at this article, which is printed here under healthsense.com MGMA. We wrote that for the MGMA to kind of lay out how to operate from a reimbursement perspective within ACOs. I think you'll find that beneficial. Value-based contracting. Efficiency, qualitative, and quantitative metrics can affect as much as 5% or more of your reimbursement. Over time, we expect more because Medicare is moving in a direction now by 2016, I believe, of about 30% of 2017, about 30% of Medicare reimbursement may be value-based in some form. And basically, value-based means that a portion of your payment now is not only fee-for-service, but is based on meeting certain thresholds of specific measurements. These are some examples, but they could include everything from generic drug utilization, preferred drug utilization, in-network only referrals, best practices, just a whole variety of different hospital readmission reduction, all of these sorts of things, chronic care measurements, there's more and more an emphasis on care improvement metrics as opposed to just straight fee for service. So you want to integrate that. From a trends and directions perspective, there's a great, I've done some research on this topic, and you probably have read some, found an article or two that I point you at here, talking about the movement away from strictly a fee for service based model into value-based model. As Medicare moves in that direction, fully expect payers to move. This will not necessarily present itself to you overnight, but I expect that you will see an evolving and continuing trend, regardless of politics and presidential elections in the future, et cetera. You're likely to see this evolution, continued evolution of some blend, most likely of a fee for service combined with value-based rewards, with value-based rewards representing an ever-increasing portion of your reimbursement. ACOs, as I say, are more prevalent than you might expect today. 15 to 17% of our population served, somewhere in the 35 to 37 million people at this point. And the other evolution is, and by the way, I invite you back to hear a ton about this next month. I think you'll really love next month's webinar. I have a group coming in here to talk to you about how to optimize patient collections, because what's happening is, with the evolution of the Affordable Care Act, the plans have much higher deductibles by and large, and as a result of the higher deductibles, the business processes around patient collections is critical. That's going to be the topic for next month. Needless to say, patient collections, when higher portions of the fees are associated with collecting from patients, you need to have the business processes in support of it, or your revenue, you will lose money. Telemedicine for chronic care, specifically 99490, great article here. I encourage you to look at that, but there's an opportunity now, and we're seeing payers more open to this model because it definitely saves them money, it improves care, and that's a case where everybody can win and you can potentially participate. We talked about M&A acceleration, and we're seeing, of course, a lot of everything, meaning technology-dependent mobile systems, EHR, et cetera. And with that, what I'd like to do is basically, in the interest of time here, you can take a look at the final trends and directions. I think we've covered a lot of the key ones. Would like to move to a Q&A to wrap this up, so we can hit any other key points, and I'm happy to follow up on any other points after the session. So with that, Susan and Regina, let's open up the floor one last time. Okay. Susan, Regina?
Yeah, I have a question. What was your most difficult negotiation? How did you handle it?
Well, that's a great question, and difficult negotiations are probably in the eyes of the beholder. It'd be interesting. Let me tell you real quick. Great question. The one that stands out in my mind, obviously I won't talk about the specific payer or the specific practice, but I will tell you it was a large practice and a large payer, and it was in the midsection of our country. And the scenario was essentially that the practice and the payer could not agree on actual payments were to the practice. So we went through a rather long and laborious process of trying to get away from reconciling the differences in the practice's billing systems and the payer's billing system, and just communicating with the payer based on certain codes that were important to that practice and driving certain carve-out rates up, and that's eventually how we got through that. That's a very simplified view of what was a very difficult negotiation. Regina, why don't you comment on that real quick?
I worked on that same thing, and one of the most difficult things that I've come across is that when you have providers in a group who are on different fee schedules for whatever reason, whether it's a different type of specialty. I don't know how. I don't want to give away. I don't want to give away any confidential information. But for example, I run across one payer in particular who, in an orthopedic group, will pay the podiatrists a different amount than they pay the orthopedic surgeons. So trying to settle up on those types of things was extremely difficult because the payer wanted to keep that differential the same even on a new contract, where of course the podiatrists were not wanting that to be the case. So those kinds of things can present real challenges. But I kind of go back to what Steve was mentioning before, and what I might have mentioned before too, about leveraging the unique services in your group to leverage to help bring the payer along to your way of thinking when you have those types of challenges in your negotiation. And then there was also just something on the chat, Steve. Someone asked if we could go back to slides 6 through 10 on the best contracting practices. So the slide that shows best practices 6 through 10. Not sure what number that is.
Yeah, just in the interest of wrap up, what I'll do, let me just cover a couple points here, and then I can pop that up for a moment before we actually exit the session. But just in order to conclude this relatively on time here, just a couple quick points. First off, we are offering only for the attendees of this particular session a half-hour consultation. No obligation or anything like that, just to help individual practices discuss your particular situations as a part of the extended value that Quill Healthcare is providing in the expertise area. To invoke that consultation, simply reach out to Susan Charkin, who you've heard from today, and the contact information is here. And bring some of the information listed, and you're good to go. Quill Healthcare, again, thanks you for your participation. In addition to providing you expertise, they provide you a comprehensive assortment of products, both for medical supplies as well as office supplies, and are offering you a special discount. And the redemption information is here, and you will get a reminder email about how to redeem this. I encourage you to take a look at this offer, and it is on medical supplies, where it's $15 off when you spend $75 or more on medical supplies, or $30 off when you spend $100 or more. So based on that, I want to thank everybody who attended for your participation today. And we put the information here about how to contact Quill Healthcare. You can reach out to any of us at info@healthsense.com. Any questions about anything, Quill or HealthSense related, just fire us off an email if you're not sure about anything. I mentioned copies. Just please, if you want a copy of this recorded webinar as well, just wait 24 hours and go to that URL, healthsense.com/copies. So you can go there now and you'll get the PDF, but if you want the video as well, you'll have to come back a second time. And last thing, and I try to make this really fast, is go to healthsense.com/survey. I promise you it's not like a auto dealer survey that might take you a half hour. Just have 3 quick questions where we ask you about the value of this session. It's very helpful to us, and also to get any comments that you have and supplement it by sending us an email to info@healthsense.com. But even just answering those 3 questions would be great. I want to thank everybody today for your participation. Out of deference to the individual that asked the question about the best practice 6 through 8, I will take a moment to go back to that. The main part of this session is over.